Resident Evil Extinction, a novelization by Keith R.A. de Candido. Chapter 11. Before. It looks different. Tom Hoyt, the Umbrella Corporation's chief liaison to the federal government, looked over at Dr. Emily Love. They were sitting in the lobby of the White House, a place Hoyt had been several dozen times before. However, it was Love's first trip. They were supposed to be meeting with the president, as well as several key members of his staff, to discuss the T-virus issue. Hoyt hadn't wanted Love to be with him for this meeting. It was going to be difficult enough to calm the president on his own, but this deranged old woman would probably undermine his every attempt at placation. However, he'd been overridden. For starters, the White House had made it abundantly clear that someone from Umbrella's science division needed to be present. Chairman Wesker himself had agreed to this stipulation, and Hoyt wasn't stupid enough to countermand Wesker, besides which, Love was the company's leading expert on the virus. Well, the leading expert still alive, anyhow. They'd been sitting in the lobby for 10 minutes. There was very little activity in the place, which was unusual. Hoyt knew that with the country in a state of emergency, a lot of government business was being done over the phone. People were being encouraged to stay in one place, after all. Hoyt had ignored Love's comment, but she kept talking anyhow. I mean, from television, it's so big on there. This massive space with columns and stuff, this just feels like a doctor's waiting room. Did you ever watch The West Wing? Since it was a direct question, Hoyt reluctantly answered, No, the guy who wrote it was a drug addict. I don't watch TV shows written by drug addicts. Love smiled, showing very expensive dentures. You must not watch any television, then. A young man came through a door. Mr. Hoyt, Dr. Love, my name is Al Cohen. I'll be taking you to the Oval. Come with me, please. Getting to her feet, Love's smile widened. Thank you very much, Mr. Cohen. Is this your first time in the White House, Dr. Love? Cohen asked as he led them through the door and down the hallway. Yes, it is, actually. I must admit to being a bit nervous. Cohen gave the world's most insincere smile. You've got nothing to be nervous about, Dr. Love. I appreciate your encouragement, young man, but in fact everyone in the world has a great deal to be nervous about. The fact that I'm about to talk to the President of the United States is not why I've bitten my fingernails down to the nubs, I can assure you. Hoyt sighed. At least he knew that Love was taking this seriously. Cohen brought them past a curved wall, meaning that they were nearing the Oval Office. He opened one white door and held it for them. With the greatest reluctance, Hoyt entered. The president was sitting at his desk, reading a report, with the vice president, various staffers, cabinet members, and all of the joint chiefs, either in the chairs or on one of the two striped couches. Mr. President, Hoyt said, it's good to see you. Please spare me the usual glad-handing umbrella BS, Mr. Hoyt, the president said. Hoyt sighed. The president was obviously in one of his moods. The public never saw this side of their leader, and it was a good thing, as the man had a vicious temper. Hoyt had sat in this room with 4 different presidents, and no one had ever given him a tongue-lashing like the current one. The chief of staff stepped in quickly. Mr. Hoyt, we asked for a meeting with all of Umbrella's experts on this virus. We were told you had a team working on this, and we were supposed to meet with all of them. I'm sorry, but Dr. Love was all we could spare. Hoyt walked to stand between the 2 couches and the president. Love lagged behind. Love? The president snorted. You actually brought someone named Dr. Love? The doctor stepped forward. Actually, Mr. President, it's my married name. I was born Emily Johansson. Moving his gaze from Hoyt to Love, the president asked, Very well, then, Dr. Johansson or Dr. Love or Dr. Feelgood or whatever your name is, what the hell is happening to my country? Hoyt started. We're working to contain... I didn't ask you, Mr. Hoyt. See, when I ask you, I get nonsense. The reason I wanted your team here was to get some real answers. The Secretary of Defense spoke up. I'm sure Mr. Hoyt is... Shut up, Mike, the President said. Dr. Love? Love looked nervously around the room first. I'm afraid, Mr. President, that we haven't the slightest idea how to combat this virus. We have an antivirus that works on people who are infected, and it will keep them safe for a while, but only if it's administered on time, and the number of infected people is simply too overwhelming. We've been coordinating with the CDC to distribute, but we're swimming against the tide. The President shook his head. I've already declared a state of emergency on the West Coast. California, Oregon, and Washington are completely cut off from the rest of the nation. Now can we... Sir? The chair of the Joint Chiefs interrupted. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm afraid I've got some bad news in that regard. Glowering at the man in the Navy dress uniform, the President said, Mr. Chairman, I've had more bad news in the past few months than Nixon had after Watergate. Yes, sir, I'm sure you have, sir. The Admiral hesitated, then finally said, We've had reports of outbreaks of this T-virus in Oklahoma, in Michigan, and in Baltimore. Hoyt put his head in his hands. He hadn't known about this, and he wondered if anyone at Umbrella did. He had a sinking feeling that they did and just neglected to tell him. Holding up a manila folder, the President said, Mr. Hoyt, according to this report, this virus was originally developed as a wrinkle cream. Would you mind explaining to me how a wrinkle cream turns my country into the hot zone? Love raised her hand. Sir, if I may? By all means, Dr. Strangelove, the President said, waving his hand back and forth. You're supposed to be the expert. Thank you, sir. The T-virus was originally developed by Dr. Charles Ashford as a way of revitalizing dead cells. It was meant to be medicinal. Another staffer, whom Hoyt did not know, asked, Have you seen the state of California lately, Dr. Love? Doesn't look all that medicinal to me. I'm aware of that, Love said in a tight voice. I wasn't part of the development team. Then why aren't they here? The staffer asked. Love hesitated. Hoyt stepped in. They're all dead. Most of them were killed when the reactor in Raccoon City melted down, and the President actually laughed at that. Are you still trying to sell me that bill of goods, Mr. Hoyt? He held up another manila folder. This report is from the investigation into that meltdown, an investigation that only happened because I signed an executive order, one that got half of Congress coming through this office, telling me not to sign that order or they'd grind government to a halt. That the Umbrella Corporation has been such a huge help in this crisis, and a whole lot of other nonsense. See, until recently, I actually believed that about your company, Mr. Hoyt, but then I read this report, not to mention a report made by the FBI, not to mention a report made by the Secret Service, all leading me to believe that your company was actually responsible for all of this. From unleashing this virus on the country to firing a nuclear weapon on American soil. Mr. President, Hoyt started. Getting up and walking around his large wooden desk, the President wagged his finger back and forth. Don't give me that, Mr. Hoyt. We're past that. Love was staring at Hoyt with her eyes wide as saucers. What is he talking about, Tom? Nothing, Doctor. The President has been given false information about Raccoon City. Sir, it was a meltdown of... The President was now standing almost face to face with Hoyt, and there was betrayal and anger in his eyes. Umbrella had been a huge contributor to his campaign, after all. He had supported every piece of legislation that Umbrella's lobbyists had rammed through Congress. This president had been a friend to Umbrella, and Umbrella had been a friend to him. There was no betrayal quite like that of a friend. No, Mr. Hoyt, it wasn't. It was a missile. One that Umbrella owned legally, and which has a pattern of destruction that's completely different from that of a power plant meltdown. I didn't understand a lot of what was in this report, but I got the gist. Raccoon City was destroyed. Another denial was on Hoyt's lips, but he abandoned it before he could speak. The cat was out of the bag anyhow. Yes, sir. You're right. A ripple went across the room. You realize, the Chief of Staff said, that you've just admitted that the Umbrella Corporation committed treason. I don't recognize that, sir, Hoyt said, because I'm not a lawyer and because no charges have been filed. They will be, the Chief of Staff said. Rest assured, the President said tightly, I fully intend to bring your company down. You've made me out to be a fool, and history's going to remember me as the person who sold the United States out to the people who nuked a city and poisoned a population. Kids will remember me as the president who got everyone killed. And I'm damned if I'll let you get away with that unscathed, Mr. Hoyt. Be that as it may, Mr. President, I think we have bigger problems right now. We're the only ones who know anything about this virus, and if you decide to engage in criminal proceedings against the corporation, that help will not be forthcoming. Oh, please. That was one of the Joint Chiefs, a bald, pale man who looked as if he was sweating. You've been so much of a help so far that this disease has made it all the way across the country, and all your best experts are dead. Exactly how much do we lose if you're not involved? He wiped his brow with his hand as he stood up. Your company, sir, is a disgrace to the United States, and I'm right with the President on this. You will be made to pay for what you've... Suddenly the General's eyes went extremely wide. His arm extended straight out, and he fell to the carpeted floor, his face landing right on the eagle and the presidential seal on the rug. Chaos reigned in the room. People called for doctors. Secret Service agents came running in. People shouted. Love took advantage of the chaos to pull Hoyt aside. What the hell did he mean, Tom? Nuked Raccoon City? That's crazy. How could we do that? Hoyt tried to formulate something in his head that would satisfy the doctor, when he heard a strangled scream. Whirling around, he saw that the general who'd collapsed was biting the Chief of Staff on the ankle. Oh my God, Love said. Then she looked at one of the Secret Service agents. Quickly, you've got to quarantine this building. The agent looked befuddled. What? Hoyt realized what she meant. The T-virus had gotten loose in the White House. The general's eyes had gone milky. He had the virus, and now he was trying to bite everyone in the room. Shoot him in the head, quickly, Hoyt cried at the agent. Are you insane? The president asked. Love interrupted. Mr. President, the general has the T-virus, and he'll kill everyone in this room if somebody doesn't shoot him in the... The general leapt into the air, making a strangled noise from his dead throat, and landed right on Dr. Love, ripping into her shoulder with his teeth. People were screaming and yelling, and Hoyt felt the world tilt around him, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Sure, there was what happened in Raccoon, though Hoyt wasn't present for it, and he knew there were problems in California, but it shouldn't have affected him. He was just doing his job, and he was 3,000 miles from where this mess started. The sound of a gunshot ripped through the chaos, silencing the room. The general fell forward on top of Love, who started screaming again. Lowering his weapon, the muzzle still smoking, the Secret Service agent cried out, Crash the building! Crash it! Hoyt knew that meant they would seal the building so no one could get in or out, but he wondered if it would do any good. The White House had been infected. Chapter 12. After. LJ looked up at the sign. Desert Trail Motel. Truer damn words, he muttered as he and Carlos headed toward the motel's entrance. On the sidewalk in front of the place, which looked like it used to be a truck stop of the type that LJ wouldn't have had his butt caught dead in for no thing at all, was a big pole with signs pointing in different directions. Looked like that thing on MASH. It pointed to Alaska, Denver, Vegas, Rome, Paris, Mexico, Berlin, London, and a bunch of other places LJ'd rather be than here. Well, except Vegas. Only fools went to Vegas. The motel itself was half covered in sand, just like half the other places they went to. The desert was taking the city back. Well, the desert could have it, as soon as they were done with it. LJ hated the desert. Raccoon City was a cool place, literally. Never got too hot in the summer or too cold in the winter. Sure, they had a heat wave right before it went boom, but LJ was okay with that. But the desert was some crazy stuff. If it was up to LJ, they'd stay far away from it. He didn't get a vote, though. It was Carlos and Claire, with LJ just following orders like usual. Not that LJ minded. He'd never been much for doing that drill sergeant stuff. He just did his business. Like now. When they walked into the Desert Trail Motel, Carlos going first. He had the training and stuff. LJ was schooled on the streets. And while he bowed to no one in his ability to take out zombies, he still deferred right to Carlos. He had the skills for damn sure. He grinned as they approached the front entrance. I'm going to get me a room with a waterbed, take a jacuzzi, maybe check out the porn channel. Carlos chuckled and shook his head. For his part, mentioning the porn channel just reminded LJ how long it had been since he himself had seen a naked woman. Too long it came to that. He thought about asking that paramedic when they finished checking out this joint. She was fine. The lobby looked just like every other motel lobby in the world. He'd seen plenty back in Raccoon when he needed a place to take the hose. You didn't take hose to your crib. That just wasn't done, and plenty more lately, since they was good places to loot. There was a big poster that said, Nevada, Land of Leisure. It was funny, but LJ couldn't bring himself to be laughing. LJ didn't even need Carlos to give signals anymore. They just knew, like through telepathy or something. He'd go left while Carlos went right. He went down a corridor, but the sand was all piled up and back, and light sure as hell wasn't working, so he unhooked his flashlight. For some reason, it amused him that he had a flashlight to unhook. Back in the day, he just had his nickel-plated Uzis, a deck-to-deal 3 card, and his lucky ring that said, Love. He lost the ring somewhere in that school back in Raccoon when they were rescuing Angie. He shook it off. LJ couldn't afford to be dwelling on that old stuff. If he started thinking about all them people who died, he wouldn't think about nothing else. LJ passed by 8 rooms and didn't hear nothing, but behind a room with a tarnished golden 9 on it, he heard a noise. Tucking the flashlight under his arm, he wasn't letting go of the gun nohow. He grabbed the door handle and pulled it down. The door budged a little, but wouldn't open all the way. It was probably all warped and stuff from the heat, so LJ threw some weight into it. This time it budged a little more. Not letting no door beat his ass, LJ hit the door with his shoulder. That knocked it loose. LJ quickly held up his 9mm Beretta. Not as cool as the nickel-plated Uzis, but he lost them a while back. Besides, it was easier to find ammo for the 9s. Of course, it was dark in room 9, so LJ shined the flashlight in so he could see what the... BAM! Something slammed into LJ's back, knocking him into the room. Not something, someone. LJ knew what the zombies smelled like, and even as his ass fell to the floor, he started crawling across the ugly carpet to get away from it. Quickly getting to his feet, LJ saw that this guy was Popo, a highway cop, complete with those aviator glasses. In fact, LJ could see his own damn face in those shades, and damn, but he looked scared. He raised his Beretta to shoot, but the cop was too close and too big. The guy was 6'3" at least and had shoulders wider than Claire's Humvee, and he barreled his ass into LJ, knocking them both down onto one of the 2 beds. LJ's piece went flying across the room and under the desk. LJ tried to get up to get it, but the zombie cop wasn't having none of that. LJ had always had a simple philosophy when it came to fights. Run away. That was why LJ wore the love ring. He wasn't about the violence. Sure, he armed himself, because he wasn't no fool. But given a choice, LJ always went for the run-away option. Folks who ran away lived longer, and LJ planned to live forever. Hell, he'd survived Raccoon City being nuked, and zombies taking over the world. He could survive any damn thing. Unfortunately, he was trapped in a motel room with Officer Zombie blocking his only way out. He tried to fight, but the zombie cop was too big, and he knocked LJ on his ass. Then he used his hands that were the size of hams to start choking LJ. No way. As it got harder and harder for LJ to breathe, he thought There was no way he was going out this way. Not nohow. He was Lloyd Jefferson Wayne, and this was how he'd do. He was a survivor. But nobody told Officer Zombie that. LJ started seeing stars in front of his eyes as the zombie grip tightened. In his reflection in the cop's mirror shades, LJ saw tears running down his face and into his beard. That was wrong. Just wrong. LJ didn't play that. He had to do something. But his Beretta was under the desk. Suddenly it hit him. This was a cop. He had a piece of his own. Glancing down, he saw that there was a revolver in the holster. LJ paused for only a second to wonder who still carried a revolver. Didn't this guy know it was the 21st century? Then grabbed for the gun. Any port in a storm, that was LJ's motto, or at least it would be if he got out of this. One of the things LJ loved about zombies was that they didn't multitask. A real cop would have noticed LJ going for his piece. Of course, a real cop wouldn't have gone for it his own self instead of choking a poor defenseless black man. Problem was, the gun was strapped in, and LJ couldn't undo the thing, especially what with the world getting all hazy. But he could slide his finger into the trigger. The first shot fired down into the sandy floor. Officer Zombie didn't even flinch. He didn't flinch the second or third time either. LJ was starting to feel woozy and he needed to get this done. He pulled on the revolver so it was pointing at the zombie cop's leg. Fourth shot went clean through the foot. He didn't even blink, or maybe he did. Wasn't like he could tell through them shades. With LJ pulling harder so the gun was at a sharper angle, the fifth shot went through the shin. Still nothing. Only one bullet left. LJ was having a hell of a time focusing. Come on, pull the trigger. He focused, and he pulled the trigger. The sixth shot blew off the guy's kneecap. Officer Zombie stumbled and loosened his grip. LJ grabbed his head as he buckled and turned the head violently the way Carlos had taught him, snapping the guy's neck. Zombie cop fell to the sandy floor and LJ fell back onto the bed. God damn. Looking down, he saw his Beretta under the desk. He reached down for it and saw something move. Damn. LJ forgot that he saw something moving up in here. He looked up and saw another zombie, and he shot at it. Glass shattered as the mirror LJ had just shot fell to pieces, and the zombie who'd been reflecting in it jumped LJ. Jumping back on the bed, LJ tried to avoid getting bit. He wasn't turning into one of them, no way. The report of another gun echoed through the room and blood splattered on LJ. He knew it wasn't his own on account of it being all coagulated. Then the zombie fell onto the floor and on top of the cop. Looking up, LJ saw Carlos. Where the hell you been, yo? LJ asked. Carlos smiled. Figured you could handle it. He looked down at the splintered glass on the floor. Did the mirror piss you off? Nah, man, this guy. He pointed at the second zombie with his gun. Was reflected in it. Damn, I thought they wasn't supposed to have reflections. No, that's vampires. Whatever, yo. He put his hand down on the bed to brace himself so he could get up, only to have his wrist collapse and pain slice through his entire forearm. Ah, damn it! What is it? Carlos asked, grabbing LJ's arm. Quickly, LJ said, Just, my wrist. Probably sprained it or something. He gently eased out of Carlos's grip. He didn't need the man's help, though it didn't pay to be rude or nothing, and then started gently rubbing the wrist to make it look good. Carlos took out his walkie-talkie, or PRC, whatever that meant. Just a fancy name for walkie-talkie, far as LJ was concerned, but he used the stupid letters to keep Carlos happy. Claire, it's Carlos. The Meltell's clear now. Found 2 undead, but LJ and I took them out. Nice job. Claire's voice sounded all tinny over the walkie-talkie. We'll be right down. Oh, and LJ sprained his wrist. LJ started waving his hands back and forth. He didn't want to be examined. It's no big, yo, just... Ignoring him, Carlos said, so he might need some medical attention. Copy that, Claire said. You didn't need to be... Carlos interrupted LJ. Maybe, maybe not, but you're not a doctor, and neither am I. And neither ain't nobody else, yo. Look, I appreciate you looking out for me, but I'll be fine. The pair of them went to the front to wait for the convoy to show up, which it did in short order. Chase, that glorious redneck, drove the Encode truck, and Kmart was driving the 8x8. She'd been arguing with Claire about whether or not she could drive. Claire kept saying she was too young to drive. Carlos, LJ, and pretty much everyone else pointed out that there wasn't no DMV anymore. Didn't matter long as she could reach the damn pedals. Besides, everybody needed to know how to drive just in case. LJ didn't know why Claire had such a big bug up her butt about it, but she gave in, so Kmart got to drive the 8x8. LJ never had a ride like that when he was 14. Back then, best he could do was his cousin Bodie's Lincoln, at least until he crashed it. Bodie wouldn't let him use nothing after that, like it was all LJ's fault or something. As she hopped out of the Humvee, wearing a pair of shades that looked disturbingly like Officer Zombies, Claire said, "Spread out. Find anything of use. Food, gas, ammo, you know the drill." The ambulance pulled up behind the Humvee and Betty got out. "Somebody need my help?" she asked, looking right at LJ. "It's nothing," LJ started, then cut himself off. "What the—" He was wanting to be talking to this lady anyhow. "But if you insist," he added with a smile, as long as she only looked at his wrist and throat. "That's right," Betty said, walking over with her first aid kit. "Now sit back and relax. I'm here to help." She checked his throat, frowning at the bruises that LJ could feel forming there after Officer Zombie's attempt to choke LJ. "You like playing rough?" LJ shrugged. "Had worse." "I'm sure," Betty said with a smile. Carlos, whose presence LJ had temporarily forgotten, rolled his eyes and got up. "Oh, God, I want to go." That was fine with LJ. He was just cramping his style. She checked the wrist, and LJ didn't wince in pain at anything she did. Not surprising, since there was nothing wrong with it. And then said, "You'll live." She put away the kit and fixed him with a dazzling smile. "So what do you say? Dinner my place tonight?" Before LJ could answer, Chase called out, "Hey, Betty, over here." "It's a date," LJ said. Betty's smile got more dazzling. Then she gathered her stuff and ran off after Chase. LJ spent the next several seconds enjoying the fine booty view Betty's retreating form gave him. Once that magnificent ass was out of sight, and it was out of sight, LJ let out a long breath. Looking around to make sure nobody could see, he gently rolled up his sleeve. His arm hadn't buckled because of no sprained wrist. It buckled because he'd been bit by one of them zombies. LJ had seen this happen way too many times, starting with Dwayne back in Raccoon, and as recently as Phil, the med tech who'd been with Betty, who got infected back in Salt Lake. He knew that he was done for. Once upon a time there was an antivirus, but those days was way past. Only thing to do was to make sure he took out as many of them zombies as he could before he became one.